Welcome back. Can I ask you this? I mean, you've heard a lot of this debate, and I want you to take cognizance of this question. There has been a study recently, quite a well-publicized study, which indicates that white people have more faith in black people than black people have in white people. In other words, in short, the distrust that black people have had, which was born from 300 years of racist rule, has in fact not improved as much as it should have. It's quite a prominent study that has recently done in the Gauteng area. And it's deeply disturbing because it's probably correct on the sense that it's a good study, but if you think about it, even if we resist these points of affirmative action and restitution, don't we exacerbate that distrust? Just say we're a greedy bunch who basically want what we wanted beforehand.
I think in a true democracy there must be a greater sense of accountability and justification. So we need to hold government accountable for the way in which they infringe people's rights to dignity or to equality. To say just because this is an affirmative action measure, we should leave it alone, that cannot
But
be.
nobody's saying that.
Yes.
None of the members of the court are saying that, and with respect, as much as I've tried to probe my two colleagues here to the right of you, I mean right geographically, I don't think anybody's saying that.
But it
So in other
seems
words,
to
if
me,
you're saying that, fine,
it
let's move on.
seems to me that the view or the vibe I'm getting is that the view of the people is that solidarity is against affirmative action, and that solidarity.
No, I'm trying to tease
is
out of you what
trying-
form of it. So,
Well,
yeah.
we are for a form of affirmative action which is input-based and not measured on the outputs.
All right, could I ask
what
you-
does that mean?
Yes,
Sorry,
what does it
just
mean?
to
Yes,
clarify,
please,
what
I'm
does
sorry.
that mean? If your employment equity plan, I'm going to make a simple scenario. If your employment equity plan say you have to choose 5 people to be appointed as an engineer, but you must make sure that all 5 of them are African. But there's only 4 African individuals out there that's engineers. Then your plan is irrational. And that form of affirmative action is irrational, because what will that lead to? It's going to lead to situations where positions are ring-fenced, earmarked for positions, or where candidates that have the proper qualification is not employed.
But what you're defining is not affirmative action.
Yeah.
Well,
Affirmative action
exactly,
is
but
clearly
that is what's
defined in the
happening,
EA.
and that's what's happening. That's what's happening. What is in the current
Where?
form and when?
Where exactly?
Where?
Where does that happen?
Look at the employment equity plans of the government departments. It's looking at the national racial demographics, and that's the objective which they want to achieve. But do they consider what's the pool from which the individuals they can choose? No, they don't consider that. What is the consequence of that? The consequence of that is that positions are left vacant.
Well, if Dirk is correct, that there is a practice of affirmative action that amounts to job reservation, say, for example, you have 5 positions available and you only have 4 black people who can fill it, and then they don't fill the 5th because there is no black person available, then, in my view, with respect, that's not affirmative action.
Well, that's why we have 35 cases pending in the Labour
You can't even
court, so-
define as affirmative action,
Yeah.
though, because it doesn't even come into the debate.
I think then we're there at a point of confirmation that we're all on the same page of how. But the question is, in the Barnard case, what was that other than job reservation, a reservation of the position?
Sorry,
no,
I'm
but the
trying to.
Constitutional Court
I
has
think we're
said
going back
that
there.
is
I mean,
not-
I think the answer is, what do you do if service delivery wasn't compromised and the post was actually abolished and reconstituted? What are you getting so cross about?
Well, the question is, how can we say that service delivery wasn't hampered?
Because I don't know, neither do you know.
Yes, because the
Barnard
National
said it wasn't.
Commissioner didn't testify.
but
He
Barnard
was the
said it.
accountable.
But Colonel
Barnard said
Barnard
No, Barnard, what Barnard
Sorry,
said is
the
what
ju-
Barnard
I have the
said.
judgment here.
Let's
Colonel
read
Barnard.
it. Let's read it then, because what Barnard said, if one of the African males were appointed, service delivery would not have been.
affected.
None of them were appointed.
fact,
The
but-
National Commissioner decided not to appoint one of them.
So this had
He
nothing.
decided.
So that had
yes.
to do, so that's a question of stupidity then, not a question of affirmative action.
Absolutely.
Because you could have appointed a decent black candidate, for
Well,
goodness sake.
that's the facts.
All right, but let me ask you this. What do you say about the affront to dignity of a white person who doesn't get appointed when they've got 85?
I think the reality is that if we look at, for example, graduate unemployment, it is still easier for a white graduate to find a job. It takes on average 6 months than it is for a black graduate. And I think we have to look at this in a measured manner and holistically. And I want to use an example from my own personal experience. My father and his family came from Zimbabwe in the early 70s. And they did not have money to send him to tertiary education. He had to go straight into the job market, relatively unqualified. It was easier for him to work our family out of poverty in a generation than it would be for a black person at the similar level, because the apartheid state and the apartheid era companies created means to do that through apprenticeship, through skills development, through state enterprises. It was much easier to do it that way. And that ties exactly into the DA's position on redress, is that we must put in place measures that facilitate the advancement of previously disadvantaged people. It's not just black people. To facilitate that and to make it easier for them to escape poverty, to escape that kind of destitution in a generation.
All right. But do you accept that there is a tension between a non-racial dream and restitutionary measures based on race?
Well, obviously, it's inevitable.
And how does one reconcile that?
It's a tough question. It's really a tough
question. That's why I've asked you.
It's really difficult. One has to, you see, I gave a chat the other day to alumni
I gathered
UCT.
so.
And one of the things I suggested was the reason we don't have, for example, a sell-by date of affirmative action is because of the pace of transformation in the country. So for as long as people are reluctant to transform, for as long as people are reluctant to give opportunities to those who Marius says have been previously disadvantaged by apartheid, affirmative action, I'm afraid, is going to be with us for a while. And as Falavazes and Jay says, and I'm paraphrasing him, grin and bear it.
2 points. Firstly, the State Department is already transformed totally. The minister,
How do you arrive at that constitution?
the minister has said that in Parliament, confirmed that there is the whole State Department has been transformed. So there hasn't been that slow pace.
To what extent?
To the extent that they reflect the national demographics, and even beyond that. So
Well, the
State
DA
Department
disagrees with
If you look at the annual reports and you look at the HDI categories under the HR
I
section,
agree.
there are some incredible disparities or there's evidence to counter your claim. Especially,
well, that's what the minister said. So
I don't know where he's getting his
he's
scripts
missing
from.
But can I just ask you this?
Well-
I mean, what about the private sector, which is notoriously
well, that's
slow in
that's
this
my
regard?
second question. To what should they transform?
But why should the private sector of South Africa not reflect the demographics of the country?
So is that our end goal
Well,
for
do you think
affirmative
it
action?
should? Do you think it shouldn't be?
Well, the question
I'm not talking
is,
about in quotas. I'm not saying that 84% or whatever it is of all posts should be black and 7% coloured and 6%, whatever it may be. What I'm asking is a different question, broadly speaking. And I think all our law talks about broadly speaking. If you walk into, generally a representative office, would you not think it better that there be more qualified black people there, reflecting the demography of our country?
and there's the key word, qualified.
Suitably qualified.
If we look at the qualification skill and we say, well, this is the qualification skill, this is the pool, we want that to be reflective.
But then you
That
have
is
to admit-
that is rational.
Then you have to admit that there's been barriers to qualifications.
Well-
and we haven't yet removed that adequately.
And there's
How
a
do you
I'm
do
afraid,
that?
and there's a barrier to my time, which is that I have to finish now. But it'd be very good to have you all back, because what this is a conversation we have to have as a nation, not just in a half an hour. This is a serious conversation because, as the Constitutional Court said, there are tensions. The tension isn't so much, I suspect, necessarily between the individual and restitutionary measures, although it is true that individuals do get affected. But there is a tension between a vision that will be a non-racial society in which the merit of a human being counts more than the skin, race, or gender of the human being, and restitutionary measures which are designed to actually get us there because of our terrible past. How do we structure that balance? How do we get it right? Well, you've heard quite a bit of the debate as the Constitutional Court grappled with this in the important case of Barnard. What is the appropriate balance? Judge for yourself. Goodbye.